sorry ass DJ.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MMB podcast. My name is Bailey.
Hi guys, my name is Mahi, and today we'll be diving deep into a crucial issue that impacts us all, environmental justice.
Yes, in this episode, we'll be discussing what environmental justice is, why it matters, and how we can all contribute to creating a more sustainable and equitable world. Environmental justice isn't just a label, it's a powerful movement that addresses how environmental issues like climate change, pollution, and resources access disproportionately affect certain communities. And this is something that we all need to care about because it's not just a matter of environment, it's about people's lives, health, and futures.
Exactly, Bailey. The unfortunate reality is that people who suffer the most from these environmental issues often have the least say in policy decisions. Whether it's living next to a toxic waste site, having limited access to clean water, or dealing with the effects of natural disasters, the burdens of environmental degradation, sorry, I can't say that word right, aren't shared equally. That's why environmental justice is such an important concept. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, income, or background, has a fair chance to live in a safe, healthy environment.
You're so funny. And it's something that has made even clearer with recent events. From the growing effects of climate change to ongoing concerns about pollution, marginalized communities are disproportionately affected by natural disasters, extreme heat, and environmental degradation. As we mentioned in our previous episodes, these issues often hit Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities the hardest, and this isn't a coincidence. It's a result of decades, even centuries of systematic injustice.
It's so important to acknowledge the interconnectedness of environmental issues with social justice. Environmental justice is about recognizing that environmental problems are not just environmental problems, they're social problems too. When communities that are already marginalized are forced to deal with the things like air pollution, rising sea levels, or contaminated drinking water, it exacerbates existing inequalities. That's why environmental justice is such a critical part of the larger fight of equity in society.
Let's take a moment to define environmental justice. According to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulation, and policies, and their meaningful involvement in decision-making processes. So, in simple terms, it's about ensuring that everyone, especially those who've historically been excluded, is a part of the conversation about how we address environmental issues.
I think that definition really highlights how environmental justice intersects with race, income, and cultural background. For people of color, especially those in low-income areas, often bear the brunt of environmental hazards, but they rarely have a seat at the table when it comes to creating these solutions. For example, if you look at the Flint water crisis, that was direct result of policy decisions made without input for the people who were affected most. Flint is predominantly Black city. The impact on residents who were forced to drink contaminated water for years is a tragic reminder of how environmental injustice disproportionately affect marginalized communities.
Absolutely, Mahi. And it's not just Flint. There are countless examples of environmental injustice happening all over the country and around the world. For instance, many low-income communities and communities of color often live near toxic industries like chemical plants or refineries, which emit harmful pollutants into the air and water. This means they're more likely to suffer from health issues like asthma, heart disease, and cancer. These are preventable problems, but they persist because these communities don't have the same political power, resources, or access to healthcare that wealthier, predominantly white communities do.
And the environmental impact isn't limited to just air water pollution. Consider the impact of climate change. Rising temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather events are felt the hardest by people who are already vulnerable. Communities in coastal areas, for instance, are at high risk for flooding, and yet these communities often lack the resources to build infrastructure that can protect them from such disasters. This means they lose their homes, businesses, and lives, while wealthier, more privileged communities have the means to protect themselves.
This goes back to the idea of equity. It's not enough to just implement environmental policies. We need to ensure that those policies are designed to benefit the communities that are suffering the most. It's about creating solutions that not only tackle environmental degradation, but also address the root causes of inequality. Environmental justice means recognizing that in order to truly solve these problems, we need to level the playing field so that everyone has the opportunity to live in a healthy, thriving environment.
That's such a crucial point, Bailey, and one way to start is by educating ourselves. Knowledge is power, right? If we understand how environmental issues impact different communities, it's easier for us to take action. For example, did you know that Black Americans are exposed to 21% more pollution than their white counterparts, even though they produce 23% less pollution? I didn't realize how severe the disparities is until I read an article by Renee Chow titled State of the Planet, which came out in April of 2020. It's staggering to think about how the imbalance affects people's health and quality of life.
That is a shocking statistic, Mahi. And it's not just in Houston. This disparity is seen all across the country. One study found that in South Dallas, communities of color experience some of the highest levels of air pollution in the state. As a result, residents face much higher rates of asthma, bronchitis, and other respiratory diseases. This is a clear example of environmental racism, where communities of color are systematically exposed to more pollution, which leads to worse health outcomes. But here's the thing. These same communities often have the least access to healthcare, making it harder for them to get the treatment they need to combat these conditions.
Exactly. And when we talk about addressing these issues, we have to be aware of the broader context. Racial inequality, economic injustice, and healthcare disparities are all tied together. For example, when communities are exposed to high levels of pollution, their children are more likely to develop respiratory issues like asthma. According to the article I mentioned earlier, Black children in Houston are more than twice as likely to develop asthma compared to white children. This disparity is not an environmental issue, it's a healthcare crisis. And it's also a racial issue. We can't solve these problems by looking at one of these factors. We need to address them all simultaneously.
Absolutely. It's time we stop treating environmental justice as a separate issue. To make a meaningful impact, we need to tackle these issues holistically. We need to ensure that healthcare policies, environmental policies, and economic policies all work together to create a more equitable society.
Let's pause for a quick sponsor message. Big thanks to the Purpose on the Planet Foundation for supporting today's episode. Purpose on the Planet is a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating sustainable solutions to both environmental and socio-economic issues. By engaging vulnerable communities in the planting of trees, restoring landscapes, and promoting conservation efforts, they're doing incredible work to restore balance to the planet and empower communities. We're proud to have them as a sponsor today.
As we all know, climate change is one of the most pressing issues facing the planet today. And when you dig deeper, you realize that marginalized communities are the ones who are disproportionately affected by its impacts. For example, a 2020 study from Princeton University titled Racial Disparities in Climate Change highlighted that Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities are hit hardest by climate-related issues, even though they contribute to the least to greenhouse gas emissions. So why does this happen?
Well, as you pointed out earlier, many of these communities live in areas that are already polluted. These are the same areas where people are living near highways, industrial plants, or waste sites, which means they are exposed to pollutants that contribute to climate change and exacerbate health problems. In addition, these communities are often the least prepared to handle the impacts of climate change, like extreme heat or flooding, because they lack the resources to build resilient infrastructures.
Exactly, Mahi, and that's where policy comes in. Historically, climate policy has ignored the needs of vulnerable communities, but we're starting to see a shift. There's a growing movement to ensure that climate action not only addresses environmental degradation, but also tackles the racial and economic disparities that contribute to these inequalities.
And it's exciting to see solutions being proposed that prioritize equity. For example, investing in renewable energy in underserved neighborhoods, improving public transportation options to make them more accessible, and ensuring disaster relief is targeted to the communities that need it most. These are all steps that can help create a more just and sustainable future for everyone.
We also have to consider the importance of community-led solutions. So often, top-down approaches where decisions are made by policymakers without input from the communities themselves don't work. But when communities are empowered to take charge of their own future, incredible change can happen. Local efforts to build clean energy infrastructure, advocate for environmental protections, and push for greener policies are crucial for making lasting change.
I couldn't agree with you more, Bailey. It's about giving people the tools they need to fight for their own rights. We need to listen to these communities who are already experiencing the worst impacts of environmental harm. They often have the best ideas about what will make a difference in their lives.
So, what can we do as individuals? First and foremost, we can educate ourselves. Learn more about how environmental injustice is affecting our communities, and stay informed about policies that aim to address these issues. We can also support organizations that advocate for environmental justice and amplify the voices of marginalized communities.
Exactly, Bailey. And don't forget, every action we take has an impact. For reducing our carbon footprints, to supporting ethical brands, to voting for candidates who prioritize environmental justice, all of these small actions add up to the big difference. And together, we can make a future where everyone, regardless of their background, has a chance to live in a healthy and safe environment.
We have the power to make change, and the time to act is now. Environmental justice is for everyone, and we all have a role to play.
Thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. A huge shout out to our sponsors for making this episode possible, and to you, our listeners, for joining us on this important conversation. Let's keep pushing for change, and let's keep the conversation going.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, X, and TikTok, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Text us at 678-999-8212 with the code 8212. Until next time, keep being kind to each other and to the planet. Bye!
Sorry ass DJ.